Hello, everyone. Today we have a special African story for you. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of our growing community. The Demon in the Pulpit. In the heart of Lagos, Nigeria, nestled within the bustling city streets, there stood a towering church known as the House of Deliverance. It was a place where hundreds of souls gathered every Sunday, seeking healing, salvation, and miracles. The man behind this magnetic congregation was none other than Pastor Solomon, a charismatic and powerful preacher who was widely known for his miracles. People came from every corner of the country, from Abuja to the remotest villages, to witness his supernatural works. Pastor Solomon's services were something extraordinary. He would lay his hands on the sick, and they would rise, completely healed. He would pray for the barren, and within months, they would return to the altar with children in their arms. Those oppressed by demons would scream as the pastor cast out evil spirits with just a word. His fame spread like wildfire, and soon, the House of Deliverance became one of the largest and most prosperous churches in Lagos. The people loved him. They adored his sermons, which spoke of faith, hope, and divine power. His followers hung on to his every word, believing in his connection with the divine. They saw him as more than just a man. To them, he was a vessel of God's immense power. But as the saying goes, not everything is as it seems. One humid afternoon, Brother Chike, one of Pastor Solomon's loyal church members, decided to pay the pastor a visit. He had been struggling with some personal issues and sought the pastor's divine intervention. Chike arrived at the pastor's grand residence and was warmly welcomed by Pastor Solomon himself. The two sat in the pastor's luxurious living room, engaging in a casual conversation about life, faith, and the power of prayer. After some time, Pastor Solomon excused himself and disappeared into the kitchen. Chike waited patiently, his eyes wandering around the room, admiring the wealth and grandeur that his beloved pastor had accumulated. Moments later, Pastor Solomon returned with a small smile on his face. "Brother Chike," he began, his voice carrying a certain weight, "the Lord has laid it on my heart to pray for you right now." Chike, eager to receive his blessing, stood up immediately, expecting the usual laying of hands. But what happened next took him completely by surprise. Without warning, Pastor Solomon pushed Chike so hard that he lost his balance and fell backward. His head struck the edge of a nearby table with a sickening thud, and everything went black. Chike lay unconscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Pastor Solomon stood over the limp body of his church member, his expression unchanging. With calculated calmness, he grabbed Chike by the arms and dragged him to the kitchen. The pastor's strength was alarming as he hauled the lifeless body into the shadows of the house. That Sunday, the church was packed, as usual. Pastor Solomon delivered a fiery sermon, preaching for hours with the same fervor that had drawn his congregation for years. But something was off. His assistant pastor David had noticed it for a while. The once warm and generous pastor had started to change. He seemed more distant, more secretive, and his sermons, though powerful, now carried an underlying tension. After the service, as the crowd began to disperse, Pastor David approached Pastor Solomon cautiously. "Pastor, I've been meaning to ask," David started. "We haven't seen a few of our regular members in church recently. People are asking about Brother Chike, Sister Funmi, and some others." Pastor Solomon looked at David, his face blank. "Oh, I'm sure they've just found another church to attend. People do that sometimes, you know," he said nonchalantly. David blinked in surprise. The response seemed cold, almost rehearsed. "But 5 of them have disappeared without a word. Don't you think it's strange?" Solomon's eyes darkened, but he quickly regained his composure. "Pastor David, focus on your duties. People come and go. It's part of life," he said firmly. David nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He watched as Pastor Solomon walked away, a nagging suspicion creeping into his mind. The following day, Pastor David decided to visit Pastor Solomon at his home. He arrived at the house but found that the pastor wasn't in the living room. He could hear the faint rustling of leaves and realized Solomon was likely in the backyard. Curiosity gnawed at David as he stood at the entrance. Then, a strange smell wafted through the air coming from inside the house. David's heart pounded as he tiptoed into the house. The smell grew stronger as he neared the kitchen. He hesitated, then slowly opened the kitchen door. What he saw made his blood run cold. A large pot sat on the stove, and something was simmering inside. The smell was overwhelming. With trembling hands, David lifted the lid and gasped in horror. Floating in the thick broth were human body parts, an arm, a foot, and what appeared to be a piece of a face. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. He screamed, a loud, panicked wail that echoed through the house. From the backyard, Pastor Solomon heard the scream and immediately rushed inside. He found David standing in his kitchen, the pot lid in his hands. "What are you doing in my house?" Solomon bellowed, his face twisted in anger. David dropped the lid and staggered back, shaking his head. What is this, Pastor? What have you done?" Pastor Solomon lunged at him, trying to pin him to the floor, but David was quick. He struggled, fighting off the pastor's grip, and managed to escape out the front door. Panting and drenched in sweat, David ran into the street, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Help! Help! Come and see! The pastor is a murderer! He's eating people!" People gathered quickly, shocked by the assistant pastor's frantic cries. The crowd grew, and soon a mob formed, heading towards Pastor Solomon's house. They burst through the front door just as Solomon was trying to flee, a large keg of blood in his hands. The crowd attacked him, pinning him down as they called the police. When the authorities arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. In the kitchen, they found the horrifying evidence, more body parts stored in the freezer and simmering in the pot. Solomon, defeated and handcuffed, confessed to everything. He had been consuming human flesh and drinking blood, believing it gave him the supernatural powers he needed to perform miracles. His fame, his power, it had all come at a terrible price. News of the pastor's atrocities spread like wildfire. His congregation, once loyal and adoring, was devastated. People who had looked to him for salvation now saw him for what he truly was, a monster hiding in the pulpit. His church was shut down, his name was tarnished, and his miraculous legacy was forever stained with the blood of his victims. What was once a place of worship became the stuff of nightmares. The witch in the pulpit had been revealed, and Lagos would never forget. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new story. What is your moral lesson? Leave a comment with your favorite part of the story, and let's discuss.